Marcuccilli Nature Park. My name is Curtis Baumgartner. I'm the Assistant Director of the Park Department. Michael Klitzing, who led last evening's meeting and most of the previous community input meetings, just left for Jasper National Park today. So I think he was looking forward to not having cell phone reception or being able to disconnect for a few days. It's a well-deserved vacation for him. But just to give you a little history on this park, this park was received as a donation into the park system about a year ago. It's approximately 63 acres in size. And as the name suggests, we do envision this as a nature park. Casey's going to talk a little bit about the reasons why this is a nature park when she gives her presentation here in a little bit. Hopefully you've had a chance to participate in some of the previous community input meetings, and you've had a chance to review the 3 initial concepts that were presented by Casey and MKSK. Those concepts have been combined into a single concept, which we'll discuss this evening. Just as a general reminder, I heard a lot of people up here discussing kind of what's on the boards currently. This is still in the conceptual phase. Nothing's been finalized. And that's why we're having these meetings. We want to get your input. We want to refine these, make sure that you know what we're building or what we envision for the park department meets your needs as well as the broader community as well. Through the master planning process, what we're trying to do is better understand what amenities the park can actually support, the cost to develop those amenities, and then how we might phase different pieces of the development later on. Again, your feedback is critical to the development of this park, and we welcome it this evening. So I'm going to turn it over to Casey here in just a second. I did want to note that Councilor Sue Finkham wanted me to, she was here last evening to meet with the neighbors. She's not able to be here tonight, but wanted to let you guys know that if you have major concerns or things that you want to discuss, that she is open to receiving your feedback. Yes.
You mentioned the meeting last night. I'm a resident. I wasn't aware of it.
Invitations were sent out. Natalie Weaver's here, or Carson's here somewhere, but.
And all the signs posted around the park.
I apologize. Tonight's presentation is the same as last evening, so you didn't miss anything that's going to be not be presented today. So, Casey, I'll turn it over to you.
And I'd also add that meeting was recorded too, so it will be the same content. But if you're interested in the conversations that happened, you can always get on there and see it. But. So I'm going to go through the presentation and give an update on the advancements from our last meeting. And then at the end, we'll open it up for some conversation, just kind of like we have prior. Is everyone in the room familiar with the site? I know there's a lot of neighbors here. If there's anyone who's not, then I can kind of orient. This slide's really for orienting people who are not familiar with this site. So please raise your hand and I'm happy to go through that if there's anybody. Okay, so I'm going to move forward because you guys are all very familiar with this really special site that, that you are connected to and get to experience. We've talked about this slide before, and just pointing out that we're here at the end of the sort of conceptual phase of this part of the project, of the master planning project. And then we'll move into, after we get the feedback from this version of the concept, we'll move forward into sort of a reporting of this process. And basically that report will then be utilized to get funding for the park. There will be problems identified that need further study as the park moves forward. But these are by no means construction documents or schematics. These are just something like a visionary thing to get things up off the ground. But one thing that this report will also do is it'll record any and all of your concerns, as far as last night we talked a little bit about particular buffering, between the neighbors and the park. So especially on things like that you have specific ideas on, we want to know that, because what we can do is we can sort of include that in the master plan so that when and if that phase of work starts to come online, your comments are there at the very beginning of the actual, project coming online. So just to give you a sense of where we're at in the process, we're sort of wrapping up the conceptual phase, the visioning. Reminder of the goals, that we understand that this is a unique site and that we want to preserve those aspects of the site and only really enhance them if possible, bringing more biodiversity, bringing more animals and more flora and fauna to the site. We want to accommodate a passive use. We're not suggesting, a splash pad. We're not suggesting things that you might see in a park like we are in today. Just really a lot about a trail system going through a natural area. And then number 3, there's a lot of storytelling opportunities on the site. The site contains aspects of a lot of different things that have happened in the region. And we're going to go over that in a little more detail towards the end of the presentation. But that is one of the goals, the overall goals of the master plan. And then number 4, connectivity. That is very broadly applied. Connecting nature, connecting and thinking about how the water moves through the site, thinking about how wildlife moves through the site, and connecting to the overall park system too. So this is a park addition to a park system that is striving to be interconnected with trails and connect, everybody in the community to the natural assets. Because just, looking at this park alone is a wonderful thing to provide, the community. And then goal number 5 is we're bringing innovation to the way we can continue to look at the park. And that actually applies to how we maintain the park, how we form relationships with the neighbors and the, Harvest Church. We've been continuing those conversations about how to have some shared usage of their property. I think that's a very innovative thing, but also the Parks Group is a very innovative group in how they take care of their land. 80% of the parks that they have, are maintained in a natural state. That's not a very typical thing. They also just do a really excellent job engaging the community and keeping things nice and clean, for people to experience the park. So there's 3 major aspects that make a really effective park and public space. And that is whenever the ecology of the park is thought about, the history of the site that it sits in. So it's actually sitting within the context of the site. And then also whenever it considers the culture too. And those 3 aspects, if you can kind of build them into a park, then you end up with a really effective public park space. We've tried to do that in all of these. We were going to do.
Okay, I just don't want to forget my question. You can give them all away to the end. I have all these questions that I completely forgot about.
I can give you a pad of paper. I have an extra one.
You know what? I'm just gonna,
Okay, no problem. So we started with an analysis, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but it's here in case we need to kind of review it. But we started by looking at individual aspects and things, land usage, pedestrian circulation around the park, the hydrology, as well as the soil underneath the ground. But we started to merge those things together to get a better picture of really important view sheds that might want to be considered as trees are placed. And even though some of the things look pretty organic, when you look at the plan, we put a lot of thought into them. And so we want to continue that and hear your thoughts about what you see on the paper so that we can continue to refine that and guide this process. This is another layer. So looking at all those layers, we were able to identify some specific zones. And, right now you look out at this site and it really has, you might see somewhat of a monoculture out there, although there are subtle differences for sure. In fact, there's the opportunity to have even more diversity in the different plant communities. So each of these different colored zones could have their own sort of identity when it comes to the plant community and the seasonal aspects. And so we really just tried to take a layer of thinking to this. And the way we got here is we compared the topography with the soil profiles, and we started to understand better where different things might be able to be grown or look different. So last time we got together, we reviewed 3 concepts, and one was really focused on the storytelling. 5 concepts. Oh, okay. Well, we'll have to circle back on that. I think there were three that we presented last time. The first one was based in the landscape as sort of a stage for storytelling and education. The second one was called Landscape Forward. So what would a park look like if you really let the landscape truly inform its shape? So, and then the third one was this framework plan, which was kind of the lightest touch of a park. And so we presented these at multiple meetings, and we had quite a bit of feedback. And the feedback that we received was very supportive of both concept 1 and 2, almost kind of head to head. Now, and we can kind of share the more detailed results of that at some point, but we ended up deciding to kind of fold both concept 1 and 2 into this refined concept. We had a worksheet, kind of in like a paper hard copy worksheet that was filled out. There's an online form. It was available in the same fashion. So we got a lot of feedback that way, and then we were able to measure it. But it wasn't just the neighborhood group. You know, it was groups beyond it. And so, I'm sorry. Oh, right. Yeah, we did do some engagement with schools, but I will say we kept that separate. We measured, I mean, we wanted to know the results of that, but we also, we went to multiple classrooms, and we didn't want it to be weighted heavily towards, 3 classrooms of 24, 5th grade students. So we kind of weighed those results in terms of their level of involvement, but we kind of kept our community results, separate. But we did. We like the first one. Okay, well, let me move through this. I want to make sure I get everything out so that you guys can, so we can have a good discussion about it holistically, I guess, but I don't want to forget that or downplay that. We can talk more about that. Well, here's the overall plan. It's, kind of hard we wanted to break it down as far as how we're going to talk about it. And really, we kind of look at the park in terraces. There's basically 3 zones. There's the upper terrace, then there's the sort of depressed lower terrace, and then there's this transitional zone that happens in between. So we thought we'd talk about the upper terrace first. And within the upper terrace, you're going to find things like the restrooms, the parking. It's really how the park starts to interface with the broader community and welcomes the broader community into the park. And so overall, we have some enlargements because obviously it's a little bit hard to see here. So this is a zoomed in view of the area that is the sort of shared parking entrance with the church. And we discussed this a lot last night, but the thing that we talked a lot about last night, and I guess I'll point out to start, is that we worked on developing. So when we looked at, and we've met with the church a few times, and they've been super welcoming and super supportive of this idea at a master plan level. But we looked at their master plan and sort of their full build out vision. And that vision involved parking on this side. And their parking kind of was, like most master plans, kind of thought about in a maximum fashion. And that is, I think it involves like a 20-foot offset from the property line. So they had their parking sort of coming up about right to here. And granted, that's a master plan for them. They're not ready to pull the trigger on that, but we talked to them about buffers and how, at least within the parks, it's preferable to have, a grander buffer, a more generous visual buffer. So we ended up kind of getting to something, like this, which we're showing about a 260-foot buffer there. And it's actually, we're gonna, let me see if it's the next section, I think. That will work. Okay, yeah. So in this, that's one of the buildings here, the residential buildings that are in that area, and kind of showing the scale of people at that point. And then the first, sort of trail would be at this point, the entrance drive here, and the actual parking lot here. So you can see it's a pretty generous, we tried to get a generous buffer in there. And then, one other aspect of the park that I want to call attention to, of the parking rather, is that both the church and the parks group were sort of understanding that this might want to be an enhanced like parking lot experience, like not your regular parking lot. Maybe this back half could have more of a plaza-like feel, have pavers and some rich plantings that would sort of speak to, what the site was about. So while I know that the neighbors, especially living here, wouldn't prefer parking, we've tried to do some things to mitigate the fact that it's there. No, there's a lot to be thought about before that would ever become an actual, built project. But as far as a master planning level goes, those are some of the thoughts that we wanted to make sure to capture. And then I'll talk a little bit about the entrance into the park too. So here we're proposing a restroom structure with possibly some storage involved, and we pushed it up. I know there's that large mound of there's kind of a high point there. It's the dirt that was excavated during the construction of the church and kind of piled up there, but it actually creates a really lovely vantage point. And so we're sort of asking people to enter the park by coming up to that vantage point. It's kind of a ceremonial like moment to have a really nice big view of the park. We also did that because we thought, well, that's really attractive and that's like a compelling, place to enter, but it's also further away from, the neighborhood. And so it kind of draws people into the park that way. And then you can kind of zigzag down into the park. And along this edge, you can see some lines here, and we'll show that a little bit later, but we're imagining some kind of built-in seating into the terrace so that people can maybe just not go too far into the park, sit down, enjoy the views. Maybe they don't want to go and have that immersive experience down in the lower levels. So the bathrooms are sort of envisioned similar to something, not architecturally necessarily, but having similar elements, like almost like a trailhead kind of moment where you might have some signage that describes different trail and loops and how long they are, and then also just having some amenities there for people who are visiting. So we kind of went over this part up here, and then here we're showing the parking, and then it really picks back up here, and that's sort of the restroom building in the background, and you can see the topography that's there now, and again, how it kind of extends beyond there. So moving down to the south side, Cherry Creek, there's a drop-off suggested.
I had a question. Where's the rest located in relationship to the parking lot?
Oh. Repeat the. Oh, okay, yeah, sure. You asked, where is the restroom at in relationship to the parking? Is that right? Yeah, so right here is the restroom.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel like.
That's okay. Oh, no, yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you.
No problem. So this is moving down to sort of this Cherry Creek, the southern portion of the site. And here we're suggesting a drop-off area. This will call a little bit more attention to the fact that this is a park, but we're not asking people to linger. This is a, drop off and move on kind of thing. But as far as accepting people south of the park, pedestrians who might want to come and visit, there's a bit of a overlook here and then a boardwalk that goes down. And here's a section showing the drop off and, a little bit of a moment here. And then here's the boardwalk going down. And one nice thing about the aspect of a boardwalk is it has those railing to it. And so that's actually really effective at keeping people on the trail and off of the sensitive, landscape around. And here you can see how it descends from this level down into the park in an accessible fashion, and then kind of up to this moment. So back here, you can see Legacy Well number 25, the well to the south of the site. And I think that there's been some advancements of thought on that, although I can't speak to where it lies, but there is some thought that maybe the overlook and things like that would be omitted from that well, and that it would just have kind of its sculptural presence to make it look nicer. And then moving over to Community Drive, there's some parking proposed here along the roadway and a trail and an entrance here, as well as you get into, we would suggest, the suggestion is to maintain the existing trails there, and then the placement of a restroom facility on this part of the park. And this is an image that sort of starts to describe that. So here's the woodlot, the HOA property, and here's the existing community drive. This would be the new path and the parking right there. And then this would be like an existing trail. And this
So
would
there's going to
be,
be parking on Community Drive between the two nature parks. Is that what you're proposing?
You've seen this road, right? It's not wide.
It's not like, it's not like enough.
It's also, everybody comes to one of the concerns of every square. The doorway, we do like the traffic on that road, no parking.
okay, let's hold the comments till the end. I do want to talk to you about all of that, but there's people online too, and they can't hear that discussion as much. I
He's
just want to.
recording it, right?
Well,
Is that what's going on? He's recording it?
he is, but the mic only picks up this. And so when we get to the question and answer, I'll repeat back to the online people what your question is so they can follow along too. So, and then beyond that, where the woodland kind of comes to an end, there's a bit of an opening and a transition in the grade, and there might be a good opportunity to build in some gathering or just some stone outcropping there for people to gather and sit. And then on the northwest corner is the third opportunity for a restroom facility. Now, these are only identified as opportunities. It doesn't necessarily mean that there will be a restroom structure there. But I think that it will be really important to get your feedback on preferred locations over other ones. And here we're just identifying spots where it could happen. Also along here, there's, sort of the area that is pretty flush or similar in grade to the streetscape. And it might be nice to, again, offer some seating opportunities there for people to come. and sit and enjoy the views of the park. So here, I don't think I did a good job of pointing out on the last slide. There's also suggested parking here. And again, this would be sort of a identification of opportunities for parking. That's one of the major challenges of the site for sure. But knowing that it was in pretty close proximity to the neighbors there, we developed the idea of kind of sinking that parking area a little bit into the site so that the cars would have to descend a little bit, and that would preserve some more of the views from the upper, area and the residents. And then, they would be able to enter the site via boardwalks to kind of get down to the lower levels. Here you can kind of see the relationship between the streetscape and then the depressed areas of the site. And then that continues on. And here's a view, of course, including the northern well with the overlooks and accessible pathway there. And then over here, there's a suggestion that a walk be added there along the streetscape. There's not one now, but it might be a nice opportunity. Now we're moving to the sort of northeast up along 146th Street. And along 146th Street is a great opportunity to allow people to kind of recognize and know that there is a park back here. And so that also is an area that we had identified as a concern because there's not a lot of eyes on that area. The commercial really has their, development kind of the back of it to the park. And a lot of the residential homes there on the west don't look directly on the park there. There's like one house that does. So activating that in a way provides more safety. And also, please wait until the end. Please let me finish, please. I know you can talk about it at the end. So the elevated boardwalk would be sort of at the same level as 146th Street. And one thing that serves to do is provide a more accessible path for people. We always had that as an objective to provide sort of a short circuit, more accessible pathway. There's the potential then to, we did take some of the feedback from the children at the school in that they said, well, it sounds like you're kind of designing a pretty boring park. Where's the fun stuff? So we tried to sort of honor that in some ways, like by providing some passive play kind of opportunities where these hammock nets could almost be loungy places built into the boardwalk, and you could see the landscape down below, and it'd probably be nice for both adults and children. So it's just an idea, it's kind of just a fun idea. But here's an image down here of an elevated boardwalk. There's a lot of different ways that could happen. But one nice aspect of it too is that it really elevates the people and separates the people from the nature in that area. And so there could be a lot of benefits that way for the nature in that area. So here's some imagery that shows how that could come across in real life and what it could look like. And then over here you can see there's some like dining opportunities. Maybe the commercial eventually starts to turn their face towards the park, and that could be a really nice opportunity. Now we're in this transitional zone, and the transitional zone, really there's some good opportunities like we've talked about before for some built-in seating moments, but also for those seasonal plantings to kind of maintain the grade and the edge. But in this zone is also this central ridge area. And that ridge area, after talking more with the anthropologists at Ball State University engaging more with the tribes that have responded who have an interest in doing some interpretation and storytelling on this site. That seems to be a really important area. I mean, right away, all of those people indicated that that would have been a very active spot for the time period that they were here and using the land, and that there's probably a lot of artifacts there. And so the request has been, and we've sort of tried to honor it, to just really stay away from that area at this point. And that, you know, maybe they would, we're just kind of identifying it as an interpretation zone and trying to kind of stay clear of it. But that's kind of a special thing to know, you know, that probably was always utilized because it's a little higher, you know, there was a lot of access to different materials. And from what I understand from some of the other neighbors, this is actually a real hotbed of activity for the wildlife as well in this area. So here's some sections showing more of the relationship of how the park sits in relationship to the context. And so, you know, in this, I would just call attention to, you know, the different buffers in between the park and the neighboring properties. And, you know, just the general feeling of that mostly like this is a restored landscape effort, kind of a nature preserve that has accessible trails through it that we're still really studying the constructability of. And ultimately that could inform a lot about what actually gets built out there. So this is really looking at kind of a maximum picture of what the park could be. There's a really good chance that it never gets fully done in that fashion, but also it's something that would unfold over many decades, I think. So all that said, part of the conversation last night went to the idea of phasing, and that's some work that we haven't really got to yet. We don't have all the information we need to consider that, but I know Michael Klitzing was saying, you know, there's the potential to start to build up maybe some of those buffers in anticipation of the park coming online at some point, because those seem to be really important aspects. So, not sure where that popped up. You know, here's the, on the bottom section, you know, it shows another relationship of the existing residential, and then you kind of have this restored landscape, and then kind of a restored woodland, and then it comes to a trail here. So really nice, generous buffers. And then the last kind of lower terrace. This terrace will most definitely be pathways in here, will be boardwalks. And this is where we have our opportunity to really restore maybe something that looks more like the historical landscape that was here prior to the draining and the agriculture that existed on the site. So there's the opportunity to tell the story of water and, you know, to have a little bit of a different type of landscape that is really unique to not only this area of town, but this region. Most landscapes like this don't exist here in central Indiana. They're mostly up north. And a lot of people, I mean, they're destinations for people in that they really do attract interesting flora and fauna. So in some portion of the site, there's the desire to restore a landscape like that. So again, we're, you know, just looking at more character images of the site. And I think the one on the bottom here shows a section cut in a different direction than the one we saw before. River Road would be here, and you know, or further off the page actually. And then this would be the parking, and you can recognize probably the corn crib, agricultural corn crib. And here's the mound, that sort of main entrance into the park and how it relates. So, Oh, sorry. So beyond that, I want to kind of break it down even just a little bit further in that, we are envisioning that the overall circulation of the park isn't just going to be one type of trail. There's going to be a hierarchy, and that there's going to be trails made of different materials. And some of those, could be metal boardwalks or composite boardwalks. Some of them could just be a mulch trail. Some, as kind of low impact as that. So gravel might also be explored, but I think that we're really trying to let, again, the constructability aspect inform that more. So we're sort of remaining open until those studies are fully fledged out. So we've really covered that landscape forward concept, the shapes of those trails, the plant communities, and how we're letting the landscape inform, what the framework of the plan is, or the trails. But we also wanted to layer in the storytelling that we got feedback on as being important. And so in order to do that, we thought it would be good to actually kind of refresh our memory a little bit about the history of this place. So we studied it in sort of a timeline fashion. And this first gray bar at the top is representative of the Pleistocene era, which is the time of the glaciers and mastodons and conifer forests. And what that time period left us with is landscapes that are really specific to Thomas Marcuccilli Nature Park. The geological formation that you see is what's taught in textbooks, as far as landforms left by the recession of the glaciers. So things like kettle lakes, and we were kind of learning all sorts of new words when it came to these forms, but it's very specific to that. And so that is an opportunity to do some storytelling there. And then, oh, sorry about that. The next bar is representative of the early cultures that inhabited the site, the mound building culture we don't know a lot about. And I think that we might be missing some information kind of in between these two, but then, that culture sort of evolved into the Native American tribes that were here. And then in 1818, specific to this area, that's whenever we start to see the more of the European settlement start to happen. And these sort of hatches, the yellow hatches, are representative of the forced removal of the tribes. And then beyond that, here at the end is kind of where we're at. And so as we looked at the site, we kind of broke it out into storytelling districts, thinking that as you walk through the site, you might be able to sort of understand historically different things that might have happened there. So this area probably makes the most sense for the ecological history because it has the woodland that's there and is already pretty mature and seems like an opportune place to develop that story. We've identified that central ridge, via help from other people, that could be an area to focus on the indigenous history and interpretation. And we've included some of the low-lying depression as well in that because there are, specific plants that the tribes grew in those areas and just trying to leave that opportunity open. So there's also a few sketches here. As we've started to talk more with the tribes, they've offered up that, hey, if you wanted to kind of tell people more about like our tribal patterning and things like that, you could work them into the design of different elements in the park, whether it be signage or, whatever we might, be able to think of in the future. But that was a really nice gesture to understand that sort of communication is going to be ongoing, and it's really a relationship that's being developed, over time. And then this area, the storytelling here would be focused on progressive land management, something that the Parks Group is really passionate about, but it's also a nice kind of tie into the way that the tribes managed the land, prior to, kind of more of our modern agriculture practices. Also, this type of soil, we found out is really effective at reducing the carbon in the environment. And so actually to have this amount of muck soil, which is kind of a unique thing to have this vast area, it's really an ecological resource for the whole community. And so how do you manage that resource? Because left to lay on its own, it will just continue to disintegrate and become something different than what it is, which all landscapes are evolving and changing, but this one in kind of more of an extreme way. The longer it sits without water, it kind of morphs into something else that isn't maybe as effective as reducing the carbon in the air. There's other stories that could be told here too, whether it be, actually how is this park going to be maintained? A lot of the volunteers and how they're going to engage with it, and it's kind of yet to be told. And then lastly, up on the upper terrace, it makes a lot of sense to sort of honor the fact that that was Eli Lilly's farm and the history of, in fact, on the church property was one of the first Lenape settlements. And then when the Lenape people were removed, the first settler, he was the second settler, George Lacey, who actually owned a lot of this property. He established his residence right there where the village was on the church property. But also, we've got Conner Prairie across the road. And so this seems like a good opportunity to sort of tie in that storytelling. George Lacey, he was also the one who, when he was developing his fields, found the three mastodon teeth right here on the site. So it's kind of an interesting